All the colleges there in the 1800s were the same. Men and women were separated in competitions and other events. Gallaudet was special because all the students were deaf. It didn't matter what about ethnicity or gender. It wasn't equal, though, for women. Despite the students all being deaf, though, there was no place for women. In 1892, Mary Martin came up with the owls. It was an organization that addressed the dorm issue. There was no place for the owls to meet, though. They would have to get it approved by some other people, and they ended up having to use the elementary library out of pity. The owls found it important to fight for their rights for a place on campus. In 1892, they established a newspaper, the Blur and Blue newspaper. Despite the newspaper fell through, though, because there was not enough financial support behind it. Mary Martin really was noticed for her ideas with the newspaper and making it concrete. But still, the women were often in editorial positions and support staff. The newspaper from 1892 on, the women were still support staff and editors, as the men were president. In 1896, women established the first basketball team. Later, the men established their own basketball team. Later, the women of the Owls came together and created a club and discussed college issues and performances and literary, even though they didn't have a place. They discussed performances, stories, and came together. Their first performance was called Our Side. The men of the newspaper wrote it about the performance from their perspective. The performance depicted a woman climbing a ladder to reach her college diploma, struggling to reach her college diploma. The moral of the story was that there was no support for women. Many graduation speeches and other speeches were modeled after that. But they had to be careful about how they expressed it, so as to not offend men. In one celebration, there was a presentation that a student gave, and all the officers were boys. Stated her experience with women's oppression. In 1893, Agatha Teasdale became the first woman to get her college diploma from. She wrote about the intellectual of women, so that women were still second-class citizens. So that women can't have success after they graduate. Still, there was oppression, and they still had to fight the idea that women were second class and were not important. She didn't specifically mention Gallaudet, but just mentioned the idea in general. And that women should be equal in having higher education. And that it wasn't right that they didn't. Later in 1895, the group vows. One presentation was based on a poet. The story expressed dissatisfaction with the women's oppression. At her graduation expression, she honored Upton. Mary Martin was connected to the topic. Really, it was under the rug, and it was sort of a sidelined idea. Her life as the hull of a boat, or made the metaphor that women were the hull of the boat. Martin continued to discuss the topic and unveil the experience women had with the situation, and that they were not equal to men, and that their intellectual and strengths and skills were all there, and it shouldn't be something that was covered up. Next year in 1896, there was a graduation speech that women could become doctors and other intellectual things. But it was still a challenge at the college to overcome oppression. A woman on the basketball team celebrated that women in the world can have strength and power. Let them know their story. And it compared that women to slaves. in society. Women continue to fight for their rights. In 1895, Mary Martin became the first woman